Like I was telling you, just for posterity's sake, I am in a Master's of Divinity for Pastoral Counseling. Hopefully I will get that done given sometime this year. So I'm doing my internship here, and they're letting me teach a study on C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity. So before I even go any further, you said you'd already read it, so...
No, I'm sure you went through it.
I was a young kid, I did not.
You were a kid? Okay, so you didn't touch it at all. I know you're obviously a fan. Have you read it at all?
I've not.
Okay. What do you think it's about?
Christianity.
All the way from the back.
Back.
No one's Christianity, you're Christianity.
Yeah, so he got the title from a very famous Presbyterian clergyman named Richard Baxter, because he was belittling it in a way, and it was very, very interesting. So this is just the preliminary. I wanted to preface this with a question. What do you think makes the Bible one of the hardest books to understand today? For you, what do you think makes it one of the hardest books to understand?
Translations.
Translations, yeah, that's a huge one. Am I getting the right style? Is this really accurate? And translations also means something else too. If it's translated, it's coming from a different language, which means it's coming from a different culture. So, though one of the biggest things that you hear over and over again in seminary or whatever religious degree you're going for is context. Context is key. This book was obviously written way before any of us were even born. So why would it be relevant today? Well, we don't know unless we go over context. So this is taken from C.S. Lewis's background. So this is just to give you some highlights onto who he is and the things that influenced him. So 1898, he's born in Belfast, Ireland. So obviously we have one cultural divide aside from the Bible, because he's Irish. So he doesn't really understand anything about American culture. Very shortly after that, his mother died of cancer. He's only 10. And he started developing lung issues. So he's between 12 and 13 years old, and his dad was trying to get him out of the environment where he was getting sick. So he switches to a fancy prep school, so he's getting a lung disease, and his mother dies of cancer, and he's still a young kid. Wouldn't that make you question God?
Mm-hmm.
And he puts this in some of his autobiographical information. He says that God's alive. This is when he decides between 12 and 13. Well, obviously God is alive. There's too much suffering even in my own life, right? 1916, Lewis reads George MacDonald's Fantastis. Okay, this piece of literature is considered a classic. It's the pre-Lord of the Rings to the Lord of the Rings. One of the very first pieces of literature that was considered supernatural or fantasy in all that Victorian writing. So he's stepping outside of any other known literary genre. This is George MacDonald. And he reads this now, Lewis reads this, and he's almost into his early 20s. In MacDonald's fairy tales, both those for children and those for adults, okay? So he wrote both. The fairyland, so his motif, is clearly representing the spiritual world, our own world revealed in all of its depth and meaning, The story of a young man who finds himself on a long journey through a land of fantasy is more truly the story of a spiritual quest that is at the core of his life's work. A quest that must end with the ultimate surrender of the self. This is just a basic outline of MacDonald's book, a basic summary. But I don't know what you guys were reading when you were 16, 17, 18 years old. I was probably reading a whole lot of vampire books. Let's just be honest. Any of you guys?
What were we reading at that age?
Yeah. We're 17, 18 years old. You may have your driver's license.
Outsiders.
Oh, The Outsiders, yes. So we feel isolated at that age. We're going into the cusp of adulthood right after high school graduation, right? It's a scary time.
For a class I was in at that age, I read Dante's Inferno. I remember that.
That's pretty deep for 17, 18 years old. But then again, did any of you take any advanced English classes?
That's what I was in then, so that's why I was reading Dante's. Yeah.
So you would have been exposed to Victorian literature. You may have actually been exposed to MacDonald's Fantastis. I did not get the pleasure, but I did get to read the whole Lord of the Rings trilogy as a freshman in high school in my English class, and that was powerful. So I just wanted to book note this because it's going to be important, right? So 1917, 1918, C.S. Lewis is enlisting into the British Army 3 years after the start of World War I. Okay, now Lewis gets wounded during the Battle of Arras. He ends up getting trench fever and he's removed. And he's discharged in 1919. He lost his best friend and prior roommate to college, Patty Moore. This is a very big portion of his life. He actually does spend the rest of his life helping Patty Moore's mom. And basically being a caretaker to her and his estate after his friend dies. 1919, so Death in Battle. This is Lewis's very first publication. He's just getting out there. Any of you write lyrics or poetry or short stories, anything? No?
That was just me, I guess. I'm sorry.
I actually did. I ended up taking poetry writing classes in middle school at the public library. Oh yeah, cringeworthy. Definitely cringeworthy, but I
Now,
had
come on, where are they? Where are they?
Well, you can find them in my book on Amazon. Actually, I do have a book of poetry on Amazon, but not those, because those were a whole lot of roses are red and violets are blue. Okay. Yeah, so this is, again, okay, Death in Battle. Lewis's very first publication, very well-known magazine, and he gets to go back to college and resume his studies, okay? So the war is obviously over. And just to give you an idea of his writing, of how talented he was, so during all of this, so he receives his first honor in moderations, which is in Greek and Latin literature in 1920, a first in greats, philosophy and ancient history in 1922, and first in English in 1923 for his studies. So we have laude, summa cum laude, valedictorian. But in England, first is like being the top of your class. So very, very high honors. An amazing writer. Okay. So 1925, he gets his first job. He's elected as a teacher, a fellow of Magdalen College. And he serves as a tutor for language and literature for 29 years until he leaves in 1954. So 1929, this is when Lewis records and he says, I think I found that God existed again. Don't know who's God, just a God. Okay, that's fair, you know. 1931, Lewis, so this is 2 years later, he becomes a Christian. And this is a direct quote from him. He says, one evening in September, actually this is taken from a book. One evening in September, Lewis had a long talk on Christianity with J.R.R. Tolkien,
Lord of the Rings.
author of The Lord of the Rings, a devout Roman Catholic, okay, and another gentleman called Hugo Dyson. The summary of that discussion is recounted for Arthur Greaves in a book called They Stand Together, so you can actually read this conversation. That evening's discussion was important in bringing about the following day's event that Lewis recorded in his other book, Surprised by Joy. When we, this is Lewis talking, Warnie and Jack set out by motorcycle to the Whipsnade Zoo. This is C.S. Lewis talking. He said, I didn't believe we're on our way to the zoo. I didn't believe that Jesus Christ was the Son of God. And when we reached the zoo, I did. Pretty short conversation. I mean, in my mind. But this is where he says his transition happened. Okay? Now we're at 1933. He is 35 years old. The fall term, so back where he's working, marked the beginning of Lewis's convening of a very special circle of friends. They're called the Inklings. And these guys wrote some amazing books. Amazing books, okay. For the next 16 years through 1949, okay, they continued to meet at Jack's rooms at Magdalen College on Thursday evenings and just before lunch on Mondays or Fridays in a back room at the Eagle and Child, a pub known to the locals as the Bird and Baby. Have any of you ever been to Ireland at all?
No.
I was really, really lucky. I was really blessed. I got into a bluegrass band in college, and they did a tour of Ireland almost every year for like a week or something. And this was all set up through the school, so you know we had places to go, things to do. What you have to understand is that these pubs are like a mom and pop restaurant. Not everybody is just drinking and falling over. These are places where people would bring their families. But I do love that it was called the Bird and Baby. So members included, so this is the Inklings, J.R.R. Tolkien, Warnie, Hugo Dyson, Charles Williams, Dr. Robert Harvard, Owen Barfield, and Wevel Coghill and others. Ooh, I made it through that list without tripping over my tongue.
Yeah, you did.
So you can actually see Humphrey Carpenter's The Inklings. This is for just a full account of their special group, okay? So this has all happened, he's 35 years old, all of this is his history, okay? And then the war starts, okay? It's already been happening for a couple of years in Europe, and the United States doesn't get involved until 1941, okay? So from May 2nd until November 28th, The Guardian published 31 screw tape letters in weekly installments. Lewis was paid £2 sterling for each letter, and he gave the money to charity. In August, he gave 4 live radio talks over the BBC on Wednesday evenings from 7:45 to 8 o'clock. So his segment was 15 minutes long, guys. It's a really short time, okay? An additional 15-minute session answering questions received in the mail. So people could send in their questions after these conversations, and he gets an extra 15 minutes to answer whoever sends something in. Now these talks were originally known as Right and Wrong. After that, we came to know them as the screw tape letters. And now, we know them as Mere Christianity, as the book. Did it change?
Probably.
A little bit. A little bit. There's a few things you can say about that because people want authenticity, and they push this when they talk about reading the Bible. They push this about reading anything else. If you are a fanatic about anything, be it a special movie or that special sports team, whoever it is, you will be a fanatic for authenticity, won't you? It just makes sense. So, who was to know how much this book was actually going to change so many people's lives, right? The last thing he did, and this is just where I quit with his timeline, he did so many things in his life, but in 1950 was when the first book, The Chronicles of Narnia, was published. Any of you guys read The Chronicles of Narnia? Yeah. I tried to get my son into it. Not interested. It made me so sad. Yes.
In time. My kids took to it this year and have gotten into it, so who knows?
So here's the second half. That was, let's get up close and personal with C.S. Lewis. Let's see who he is. So you can kind of understand how God became important to him, right? I don't know what your moment for how God became important to you was, but after that moment, you have to tell somebody. You have to tell somebody about the experience that you had. Some people are just better at it than others. They are. Some people are just really good storytellers, and some people are really good at being authentic. So for its part in Christian literature, Mere Christianity is not only extremely famous, it is also well loved, because if reading the Bible itself is too daunting or it feels too hard, at his time, C.S. Lewis did the best he could to modernize it. And I think you have to do that every couple of generations, right? Even actually before every couple of generations. So what's happening around him, so before he's even born, the start of the Second Industrial Revolution. The Spanish-American War has just happened, so this is what his parents have been going through. And the rise of the women's rights groups. This is when women start really pushing to get what they want, right? 1901, President McKinley is assassinated and Theodore Roosevelt becomes president. Now, again, he's over in England. C.S. Lewis is over in England, but these are also the things that make why Mere Christianity got written so important, because it's so important to American history as well. 1902, the first electric air conditioning unit is invented. Isn't that neat? How old is he? I have no idea. The construction of the Panama Canal begins. He's living while they're building this thing. Albert Einstein formulates his special theory of relativity. Ford Motor Company invents the Model T. Okay, and this happens all before he's a little boy, and then 1914, World War I begins. No longer a little boy. 1918, thankfully, not a very long world war, and it ends. 1919, the 19th Amendment is ratified, granting women the right to vote. And this is happening in America. Hitler becomes the leader of the Nazi Party in 1921. Now, Germany was originally blamed for World War I. And this has to do with building an army on I believe it's a very specific border. They weren't allowed to do that, and they disobeyed the order. Franklin Roosevelt is elected president. Now, World War I is kind of what plays a part in America going into the Great Depression at this time. So, C.S. Lewis over in England, Great Depression happening in America. And this is all, again, before World War II even is a thought process. Now there's the Treaty of Versailles. I'm sure you guys all remember that. Hitler violates it, again, because he's building the army back up in Germany, which he was expressly forbidden to do, and starts World War II before, again, 1940, between 1940 and 1941 is when America recognizes it as World War II because they take part. But it really gets its start in 1935 because of that. And 5 years later is the official end to World War II, which is where the Screwtape Letters came out of, and changed so many people's lives. So the British government paid for C.S. Lewis to have these talks on Christianity during a world war. The government paid for that. Our government right now is working really hard to make sure that we don't talk about religion at all. So, I have a couple of these questions up here, but what I really wanted to do before we even got into C.S. Lewis's book is recognize context is key. Where he came from, how he got there is important because we all like an underdog, right? We like the people who've been hurt and we respect them for overcoming it. He didn't just live through one world war, he lived through two. And America has seen such a long time of peace that I don't think we really understand the immediacy of what he actually did. You have to understand that they were being bombed during these talks. So one, recognizing the context of himself, of C.S. Lewis as a person, but second, recognizing the context of the time frame in which it was published. And the fact that it wasn't just other Christians who were saying, hey, repent and be baptized and get saved. It was the government saying, you guys need something bigger than what we can give you. So, here it is, number 3. What do you see as similar or parallel from Lewis's time to today? I know it's 1940s, right? 1940s was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed the Andrew sisters. Anybody familiar?
Sorry.
You would know them. If you've ever watched White Christmas,
Yeah.
the Andrew sisters are in that.
Okay.
They're very famous for a song called Oh Johnny.
Okay.
Oh Johnny, oh Johnny.
Okay. Thank you.
So,
Okay.
a lot of fun. And also during C.S. Lewis's life, Prohibition. Now that's in America, not in England, but we're dealing with these problems over here. And you have family back in England, lots of ancestral roots, and they're sending letters to each other. So people know what's going on. But anyway, what do you see as similar from his time to today? Just objectively thinking about what he experienced as a person, and then what's happening in the world.
I'll say, we're not in a world war, but it would be difficult for us to think that we're in a time of incredible peace either. There's been more than stirrings. There's been wars between nations pretty continually since this time. We've lived through them. I don't think, like in his time though, we've come to the end where we see the limitations in government, what they can offer. I think we're actually, if I could do a contrast, I think there's a heightened sense of government as God now than in his time, because we haven't yet come to the end of that. We haven't come to see that to be a fallacy.
Would you see this as maybe the same feeling of urgency that they had in creating that radio broadcast? And we're feeling that as a church community right now, that urgency.
I think so. There's that amount of urgency, but it's not recognized on the secular or even the governmental level. But yeah, I think I feel it. Yeah.
I mean, I kind of agree with you. I feel like we're probably the 1935 before 1941.
Yeah, seems fair.
Taking a break. What about you guys? What do you think might be similar?
Germany's government was almost collapsed again.
Yeah.
A right-wing party took over like last time.
This is true.
Yes, so an extremist party. Yes.
Fascists rose up again in Italy.
We see them breaking things up. If we could just make this group over here hate this group over here, we've won.
Mm-hmm.
Simple divide and conquer. Okay, here. Lewis's conversion to Christianity was influenced by discussions with friends, like J.R.R. Tolkien. What role does community and intellectual discourse play in strengthening or rediscovering faith? How important do you think it is that we talk? How important do you think it is that you show up even when you don't feel like it?
Big. Extremely important.
I definitely considered myself a loner in church culture, to be honest. Wore a whole lot of black. Oh man, I really enjoyed that
Sitting
time.
in the back pew all the time.
Yeah, oh, check me on my time.
Actually, I got a text. It was a little poem. I thought it was from you.
No, I'm over here, but just make sure I'm not running.
You're
over.
fine. You're fine. You have
Okay.
plenty of time.
I know, I lost my train of thought.
Well, we were talking about community and like how important it is. I think it might be too far to say it's the primary shaper of our lives and of our souls, but I'd say it's got to be in the top three. Maybe it is number one. Some scriptures make it seem like it's like the way that we get shaped is in community.
Trinitarian symbology is in absolutely everything. At least for me, I can really see that reflected in almost every single aspect of life. So I would.
Yeah, I think it is really the way we're shaped. You are who you hang around. It's very, very valuable to have friends in faith. Yeah.
It is supposed to be like a conversation, so your answers are not being judged here.
Yeah.
This is the whole point of C.S. Lewis's book. He just wants you to think. He wants you to think about who you are in relation to the Christianity story. And he wants you to understand that even if you don't feel like it, you do belong. And eventually that does happen.
Sure.
I was gonna say,
Yes.
yeah, I think it's really important because I grew up Catholic and we were pretty, I guess, not really involved in like this church service, but like we knew people in the church, but I was like 10, so I was just like goofing around them. And then I started going back on my own more within like recent years, but just kind of like also going alone or like with my sisters and like wouldn't really talk to many people, just go listen to the sermon and be out.
Mm-hmm.
And then I started coming here within the last few months, and it feels really nice to like be able to discuss and have like when we have doubts, like be able to be reassured or clear things up a lot, so I feel like it plays a big part in it because sometimes I have questions and then I'm just talking to myself, I'm like what, I don't know, I can't make sense of it as much as you can whenever you're talking to somebody.
So one of the reasons I really enjoy C.S. Lewis's writing style, how he writes his book, in a way, he's mimicking Aristotle and Socrates and that storytelling genius that we eventually get to read when we read the Chronicles of Narnia, when we read any of his other works. He is exceptional at allegory.
Yeah.
I didn't think about the intensity of the question because of how far I liked to keep myself separate. And I've been going to church for a really long time. But it didn't really sit until I started meeting, and I finally met some good, strong Christian women. And we just go to the same gym. That's it. So, but at the end of our workout, we're sitting in the sauna and we're talking. I'm like, hey guys, I have this other class and I have to write this paper. And they just let me talk through the problem. But it has been phenomenal in my growth. So I can only imagine, man, what I wouldn't give to be sitting at a table with C.S. Lewis, J.R.R. Tolkien. These guys are masters of literature. So if you've ever read Greek mythology, they could probably quote it to you. That's that level of intensity. Yes, so my undergraduate degrees, if you haven't noticed, one of them is in English and the other one is in theater. So, yes, so you get to read stuff like this, and you get to have these kinds of conversations. But he's practicing this philosophical way of reasoning and critical thinking skills that our school system is just unable. It's just unable to cultivate because there's too many people and there's not enough resources and the teachers are overwhelmed. But just we do need to have more of these conversations as a community. Hopefully outside of these walls as well. You should be talking to people all the time. Here, the Inklings fostered a community of shared ideas and accountabilities. Okay, so that's what we're trying to do inside this building. This building is nothing special, technically, right?
Sure.
But it is an incredibly powerful tool for the church community. So the Inklings fostered their community of ideas. That's what the church is supposed to be doing. What ways can Christians today cultivate similar communities that encourage spiritual and intellectual growth? So right now, this is one of them, right? We get to have some of these classes like this. This is a very formal setting, and sometimes that's very uncomfortable for people. So maybe another question would be, do you think the church is actually doing a good job of this? Are we doing a good job of reaching the community in a way that's meaningful? Or not?
I think it's a matter of pace. Like for them to have gotten to the depth that they got to in their conversations, they weren't rushed, you know? And it's hard in keeping with this pace of life to get to that level of conversation.
I believe, so one of the things that bothered me about Catholicism was baptizing babies, right? And I get that it's the original sin concept and all of these other things, and nothing against any denomination. I was thinking about it though in my mind, and how can something that can't reason make that kind of commitment? That always bothered me. And everything about Christianity and everything we are doing here in this building is supposed to be fostering that thought process, and those brain muscles that we haven't been using, because we haven't been encouraged to do so. All right, here. Christianity is in a flux of societal and political shifts. So right now, you're seeing a whole bunch of different attitudes toward Christianity, right? Some people are outright hostile, and some people are timid, and we're also getting back to what people would see as Bible thumper extremists on the biblical side too, right? So it runs across the board. Which issues are most important to you that you think this study will likely influence or help you reconsider? What issues that you think are popularized today? So some of them are, especially for the church, right? One of the, of course, main, and it's just because nothing else is coming to mind right now, I'm sorry. one of the main arguments that the church always goes back to, and rightly so, is the abortion issue, the pro-life, pro-choice. This issue that has never gone away, because it is, for the secular world, it's an unanswerable question, and it will never have a solution. For the Christian, you know the answer and you know the solution. So, that's one example. What do you see as important? Like, what were you thinking of when the election happened? What were you thinking of that was important, that swayed your vote one way or another, right? And again, it does not matter, like, who you voted for or whatever, but I want you to think that level of importance to humanity, right, and to yourself. What issues did you think were the most important? And do you think this study will influence them? Or do you think it will help you reconsider them?
So one thing that comes to my mind is, there's no escaping being in a highly politicized context. And he certainly was. And we find ourselves in one. And so when I think about it as an issue, I just think of it in terms of a focus issue. Can we see C.S. Lewis in wartime and when political regimes were all the talk, call people's attention to Christ in a transcendent way, like focus on Jesus and how he's able to do that, and why he would get time to talk to people via radio waves so the big issue would be just, even in the church, I sense that there's a Christlessness at times. There's kind of other things, swirling issues and even political rhetoric and stuff. And C.S. Lewis was able to find Jesus and make him center in people's minds and thinking. So I'm interested in that in this as well. It's just like,
how can we redirect every social issue back towards Christ?
Yeah.
In a meaningful way.
Yeah, and help people with them and give the Christ answers, in a way where at the end of the day, people leave and they think, Jesus is amazing. Christ is awesome. As opposed to this political side, this one, or this church, or this church. It's like, but Christ is the answer.
Oh, yeah. That one's good. I know when, are y'all familiar with the Black Lives Matter movement and stuff? When that first started off, and then some churches were saying Blue Lives Matter.
Right.
And first of all, church community should not be that polarized anyway. You should not be making any kind of political stance, because that's not your job. But how divisive that was. And so I'm married, and my husband is African American, and we have mixed children. You can't escape that political atmosphere, and I don't think we've ever escaped it. And sometimes it still feels like we're kind of living in this weird twilight zone in America, where we're trying to bring back that feeling from the true persecuted times. And I'm not saying it didn't happen, but I am saying that level of violence is not the modern level that they're trying to make it out to be. And that's a hard conversation to have with anybody. I don't even know how to do it yet. Because it's so countercultural right now. And one of the other things that bothers me, that I hope that this will help, is our communication skills. Those are some important ones to me, because what this political race showed me wasn't that the Democrats were right or the Republicans were right. It was that we had lost the ability to discuss rationally any difference that we felt, because our emotional reaction was more important than the facts.
Yeah.
That bothered me immensely. And I don't know if we can recover from that, because that just means, for me, that means that our focus isn't on critical thinking. It's on woe is me and victimhood, and who can I blame to turn you away? And that's exactly what World War II was completely about. Woe is me. Hitler was actually Jewish, and he hated that part of himself, and he was a painter, and he got rejected from art school. So because he couldn't get in, he creates a hate group that eventually takes over the country. That was his level of emotional maturity. That's pretty wild. Now, I know that there's steps in between that, of course, right? But when boiled down, that is a lack of emotional control. Aside from, there were probably some other things there. You know, we can't say all of that. Here, Lewis regained belief in God before becoming fully Christian. Okay, so he had to find his way back to saying there is God, right? How are we looking on time?
Fine. You got time.
Okay. Regain belief in God before becoming fully Christian. Do you guys know anybody who's pinballed between back and forth, yeah? One of my brothers, just like that. Walks away from Christianity, walks back, says there's God, maybe it's Christianity, walks away, walks back, says, well, maybe there's God, and maybe it's not Christianity. Walks away, you know? And this will become a part of one of his other chapters. I asked that question earlier. I just wanted to make sure I hit all of my points. Yeah, okay. That was all I actually had just for today. So how I'm hoping to proceed, do all of you have a copy of Mere Christianity?
I do.
Okay. How can we get copies?
Yeah.